Here's something. There was a case in 1722, but the hippogriff was convicted. Look what they did to it. That's disgusting. This might help. A Manicore savaged someone in 1296, and they let the Manicore off. Oh no, that was only because everyone was too scared to go near it. While the rest of the castle, the usually magnificent Christmas decorations, had been put up, despite the fact that hardly any of the students remained to enjoy them. Thick streamers of holly and mistletoe were strung along the corridors, and mysterious lights shone from inside every suit of armor, and the castle hall was filled with its usual 12 Christmas trees, glittering with golden stars. A powerful and delicious smell of cooking pervaded the corridors. By the Christmas Eve, it had grown so strong that even Scabbers poked his nose out in the shelter of Ron's pocket to sniff hopefully at the air. On Christmas morning, Harry was awoken by Ron throwing his pillow at him. "Oi! Presents!" Harry reached for his glasses and put them on, squinting through the semi-darkness. In the foot of his bed, where there a small heap of presents, or parcels that appeared, Ron was already ripping paper off his own presents. Another sweater from Mom, maroon again. See if you've got one." Harry had. Mrs. Weasley had sent him a scarlet sweater with the Gryffindor lion knitted on the front. Also, a dozen home-baked mince pies, some Christmas cake, and a box of nut brittle. As he moved all these things aside, he saw a long, thin package lying underneath. "What's this? Or what's that?" asked Ron, looking over freshly unwrapped pair of maroon socks in his hand. "Dunno." Harry ripped the parcel open, gasped at the magnificent gleaming broomstick, rolled it onto the bedspread. Ron dropped his socks and jumped off his bed for a closer look. "I don't believe it," he said hoarsely. It was a firebolt, identical to the dream broom that Harry had gone to see every day in Diagon Alley. Its handle glittered as he picked it up. He could feel it vibrating as Uni let go. It hung in mid-air, unsupported, at exactly the right height for him to mount it. His eyes moved from the golden registration number at the top over the handle, right down to the perfectly smooth, streamlined birch twigs that made it up the tail. "Who sent this to you?" said Ron in a hushed voice. "Look and see if there's a card," said Harry. Ron ripped the firebolt's wrapping. "Nothing. Blimey, who spent that much on you?" "Well," said Harry, feeling stunned, "I'm betting it wasn't the Dursleys." "I bet it was Dumbledore," said Ron, now walking around with the firebolt, taking in every glorious inch. "He sent you that invisibility cloak anonymously." "That was my dad's, though," said Harry. "Dumbledore is just passing it on to me. He wouldn't spend hundreds of galleons on me. He can't go giving students stuff like this." "That's why he wouldn't say who it's from." "It's from him," said Ron. "In case some git like Malfoy said it was favoritism." "Hey, Harry!" Ron gave a great whoop of laughter. "Malfoy! Wait till he sees you on this. He'll be sick as a pig. This was the international standard of broomstick, this is." "I can't believe this," Harry muttered, running his hand along the firebolt while Ron sank onto Harry's bed, laughing his head off at the thought of Malfoy, who... "I know," said Ron, controlling himself. "I know who it could have been. Lupin." "What?" said Harry, now starting to laugh at himself. "Lupin? Listen, if he had this much gold, he'd buy himself some new robes." "Yeah, but he likes you," said Ron. "And he was away when your Nimbus got smashed. and he might have heard about it and decided to visit Diagon Alley and get it for you." "What do you mean he was away?" said Harry. "He was ill when I was playing in that match." "Well, he wasn't in the hospital wing," said Ron. "I was there, cleaning out the bedpans for detention for Snape, remember?" Harry frowned at Ron. "I can't see Lupin affording something like this." "What are you two laughing about?" Hermione had just come in, wearing her dressing gown and carrying Crookshanks, who was looking very grumpily at the string of tinsel tied around its neck. "Don't bring him in here," said Ron hurriedly, snatching Scabbers from the depths of his bed and stowing him in his pajama pocket. But Hermione wasn't listening. She dropped Crookshanks onto the Seamus's empty bed and stared open-mouthed at the firebolt. "Oh, Harry, who sent you that?" "No idea," said Harry. "There wasn't a card or anything with it." To his great surprise, Hermione did not appear either excited or intrigued by this news. On the contrary, her face fell, and she bit her lip. "What's the matter with you?" said Ron. "I don't know," said Hermione slowly. "But it's a bit odd, isn't it? I mean, this is supposed to be quite a good room, isn't it?" Ron sighed asperely. "It's the best room there is, Hermione," he said, "so it must have been really expensive." "Probably cost more than the Slytherin rooms put together," said Ron happily. "Well," he said, "who'd send Harry something that as expensive as that, and not even tell him they sent it?" said Hermione. "Who cares?" said Ron impatiently. "Listen, Harry, can I have a go on it, can I?" "I don't think anyone should ride that broom just yet," said Hermione shrilly. Harry and Ron looked at her. "What do you think Harry's going to do with it? Sweep the floor?" said Ron. But before Hermione could answer, Crookshanks sprang from Seamus's bed right onto Ron's chest. "Get him out of here!" Ron bellowed as Crookshanks' claws ripped his pajamas, and Scabbers attempted a wild escape over his shoulders. Ron seized Scabbers by the tail and aimed his misjudged kick at Crookshanks that hit the trunk on the end of Harry's bed, knocking it over and causing Ron to hop up and down, howling with pain. Crookshanks' fur suddenly stood up on end. A shrill, rinny whistling was filling the room. The pocket sneak-scope had become dislodged from Uncle Vernon's old socks and was whirling and gleaming around on the floor. "I forgot about that," said Harry, bending down and picking up the sneak-scope. "I never wear those socks, if I can help it." The sneak-scope whirled and whirled and whirled in his palm. Crookshanks was hissing and spitting at it. "You'd better take that cat out of here, Hermione," said Ron furiously, sitting on Harry's bed, nursing his toe. Can't you just shut that thing up?" he added to Harry, and Hermione strode out of the room, Crookshanks' yellow eyes still fixed maliciously on Ron. Harry stuffed the sneak-scope back into the socks and threw it back into his trunk. All that he could be heard now was Ron's stifled moans of pain and rage. Scabbers was huddled in Ron's hands. It had been a while since Harry had seen him out of Ron's pocket, and he was unpleasantly surprised to see that Scabbers, once so fat, was now very skinny. Patches of fur seemed to have fallen off, too. "He's not looking too good, is he?" Harry said. "It's stress," said Ron. "He'd be fine if that big stupid furball would leave him alone." But Harry, remembering what the woman in the magical menagerie had said about rats only living 3 years, couldn't help but feeling that unless Scabbers had powers he had never revealed, he was reaching the end of his life, and despite Ron's frequent complaints about Scabbers, with both boring and useless, he was sure Ron would be very miserable if Scabbers died. Christmas spirit was definitely thin on the ground in the Gryffindor common room that morning. Hermione had shut Crookshanks in her dormitory, but was furious with Ron for trying to kick him. Ron was still fuming about Crookshank's fresh attempts to eat Scabbers. Harry gave up trying to talk them to talk to each other, and devoted himself into examining the firebolt, which he had brought down to the common room with him. For some reason, he seemed to annoy Hermione as well. She didn't say anything, but she kept looking darkly at the broom as though it had been criticizing her cat. At lunchtime, they went down to the great hall to find that the house tables had been moved against the walls again, and that the single table set for 12 stood in the middle of the room. Professor Dumbledore, McGonagall, Snape, Sprout, Flitwick were there, along with Filch, the caretaker, who had taken off his usual brown coat and was wearing a very old, rather mouldy-looking tailcoat. There were only 3 other students, 2 extremely nervous-looking first years, and a sullen-faced Slytherin 5th year. "Merry Christmas!" said Dumbledore to Harry, Ron, and Hermione as they approached the table. "As there are so few of us, it seemed foolish to use the house table. Sit down, sit down." Harry and Ron and Hermione sat down side by side at the end of the table. "Crackers," said Dumbledore enthusiastically, offering the end of a large silver noisemaker to Snape, who took it reluctantly and tugged. With a bang and a gunshot, the cracker flew apart to reveal a large, pointed witch's hat topped with a stuffed vulture. Harry, remembering the Bogart, caught Ron's eye, and they both grinned. Snape's mouth thinned, and he pushed the hat towards Dumbledore, who swapped it for a wizard hat at once. "Dig in," he advised the table, beaming around. As Harry was helping himself to the roast potatoes and the doors of the great hall opened again, it was Professor Trelawney gliding towards them as though on wheels. She had put on a green sequins dress in honor of the occasion, and making her look even more than ever like a glittering, oversized dragonfly. "Sybil, this is a pleasant surprise," said Dumbledore, standing up. "I have been crystal gazing, Headmaster," Professor Trelawney, in her mistress' most fairy-like voice, "and, to my astonishment, I saw myself abandoning my solitary luncheon and coming to join you. Who I am to refuse the promptings of fate? At once I hastened from my tower, and I do beg you to forgive my lateness." Certainly, said Dumbledore, his eyes twinkling. "Let me draw you up a chair." And he did, indeed, draw a chair in mid-air with his wand, which revolved for a few seconds before falling with a thud between Professor Snape and McGonagall. Professor Trelawney, however, did not sit down. Her enormous eyes had been roving around the table, and suddenly she uttered a kind of scream. "I dare not, Headmaster. If I join the table, there shall be 13. Nothing could be more unlucky. Never forget that when the 13 dine together, the first rise will be the first to die." "Well, I'll risk it, Sybil," said Professor McGonagall impatiently. "Do sit down. The turkey's getting stone cold." Professor Trelawney hesitated, then lowered herself onto the empty chair. Her eyes shut and her mouth clenched tight, as though expecting a thunderbolt to hit the table. Professor McGonagall poked a large spoon with the nearest tureen. "Tripe, Sybil?" Professor Trelawney ignored her, eyes open again. She looked around and once more said, "But where is dear Professor Lupin?" "I'm afraid the poor fellow's ill again," said Dumbledore, indicating that everybody should start serving themselves. "Most unfortunate that he should happen on Christmas Day." "But surely you already knew that, Sybil," said Professor McGonagall, her eyebrows raised. Professor Trelawney gave Professor McGonagall a very cold look. "Certainly I knew, Minerva," she said quietly. "But one does not parade the fact that I is all-knowing. I frequently act as though I'm not possessed with the inner eye, so not to make others nervous." Well, that explains a great deal, said Professor McGonagall tartly. Professor Trelawney's voice suddenly became a good deal less misty. If you must know, Minerva, I have seen that poor Professor Lupin will not be with us for very long. He seems aware himself that his time is short. He positively fled when I offered a crystal gaze for him. Imagine that, said Professor McGonagall dryly. I doubt, said Professor Dumbledore in a cheerful, slightly raised voice, which was to put an end to Professor McGonagall and Professor Trelawney's conversation, that Professor Lupin is at any immediate danger. Service, you've made the potion for him again? Yes, Sir Headmaster, said Snape. Good, said Dumbledore. Then he should be up and about in no time. Derek, have you had any of these chipolatas? They're excellent. The first-year boy went furiously red at being addressed directly by Dumbledore, and who took the platter of sausages with trembling hands. Professor Trelawney behaved almost normally until the very end of the Christmas dinner. About 2 hours later, full of bursting with Christmas dinner and still wearing their party hats, Harry and Ron got up from the table, and she shrieked loudly, "My dears! Which one of you left the seat first? Which?" "Dunno," said Ron, looking uneasily at Harry. "I doubt it will make much difference," said Professor McGonagall coldly, "unless a Mad Axeman is waiting outside the door to slaughter the first into the entrance hall." Even Ron laughed. Professor Trelawney affronted. "Coming?" Harry said to Hermione. "No," Hermione muttered. "I want a quick word with Professor McGonagall." "Probably trying to see if she can get any more classes," yawned Ron. As they made their way to the entrance hall, which was completely devoid of a Mad Axeman, when they reached the portrait hole, they found Sir Cardigan enjoying Christmas party with a couple of monks, several previous headmasters of Hogwarts, and his fat pony. He pushed up his visor and toasted them with a flagon mead. "Merry Christmas, Password, scurvy cut," said Ron. "And same to you, sir," roared Sir Cardigan, and the painting swung forward to admit them. Harry went straight up to the dormitory, collected his firebolt from the broomstick servicing kit that Hermione had given him for his birthday, brought them downstairs, and tried to find something to do with the firebolt. However, there was no bent twigs to clip. The handle was so shiny already it seemed pointless to polish it, and Ron simply sat admiring it from the angle until the portrait hole swung open. Hermione came in, accompanied by Professor McGonagall. Though Professor McGonagall was head of Gryffindor House, Harry had seen her in the common room only once before. That had been to make a very grave announcement. He and Ron stared at her, both holding the firebolt. Hermione walked around them and sat down and picked up the nearest book and hid her face behind it. "So that is it, said Professor McGonagall beadily, walking over to the fireside and staring at the firebolt. "Miss Granger has just informed me that you have been sent a broomstick, Potter." Harry and Ron looked around at Hermione. They could see her forehead reddening at the top of her book, which was upside down. "May I?" said Professor McGonagall. But she didn't wait for an answer, and she pulling the firebolt out of their hands. She examined it carefully from head to twigs. "And there was no note at all, Potter? No card? No message from any kind?" "No," said Harry blankly. "I see," said Professor McGonagall. "Well, I'm afraid I will have to take this, Potter." "What?" said Harry, scrambling to his. "Why?" "It will need to be checked for jinxes," said Professor McGonagall. "Of course, I'm no expert, but I dare say Madam Hooch and Professor Flitwick will strip it down." "Strip it down?" repeated Ron, as though Professor McGonagall was mad. "It shouldn't take them more than a few weeks," said Professor McGonagall. "You will have it back if we're sure it's jinx-free." "There's nothing wrong with it," said Harry, his voice shaking slightly. "Honestly, Professor, you can't know that, Potter," said Professor McGonagall quite kindly. "Not Not until you've flown on it. At any rate, I'm afraid that is out of the question until we are certain that it has not been tampered with. I shall keep you informed." Professor McGonagall turned on her heel, carried the firebolt out of the portrait hole, which closed the door behind her. Harry stood there staring after her, and a tin of high-finished polish still clutched in his hands. Ron, however, rounded on Hermione. "What did you go running to McGonagall for?" Hermione threw her book aside. She was still pink in the face, but stood up and faced Ron defiantly. "Because I thought Professor McGonagall agreed with me that broom has probably been sent to Harry by Sirius Black."